Ladies and gentlemen, good morning, good afternoon, whatever time of day it is that you find yourself watching this video in. I hope that this message finds you in good health. Allow me to introduce myself. My name is Paul Nyland. I am the founder of Lifeline Ukraine, which is the national suicide prevention hotline here in Ukraine, a country I'm sure that you've all heard about. And I'm going to tell you a little bit more about this country, about what's happening here, and about the organization that I created. I'm very, very grateful to the Towards Unity for Health 2026 Disaster Mental Health Summit for the opportunity to speak to you and to give you this information. Now, the observant among you will notice that I don't have much of a backdrop. I'm sitting here on a Sunday afternoon in my home on my sofa. I don't have any slides prepared, but I'm a storyteller. So I'm going to tell you a few stories. What I'm going to tell you is I'm going to tell you my background, who I am, how I came to be the founder of a suicide prevention hotline for a country. I'm going to tell you how the full-scale war has changed the operations of Lifeline Ukraine. And finally, then I'm going to tell you as well where the organization is at today, where we're going in the future, and our plans for further development. So I thank you very much for your attention. I hope that even though I'm not using visual aids, you won't find this boring. As I say, I'm a storyteller. And because I'm a storyteller, one of the other things that I do, as well as running Lifeline Ukraine, is that I'm a journalist. And as with many things in life, my journey into journalism sort of happened by accident. The war in Ukraine began back in 2014. We had just been through a revolution. It began as a protest called Euromaidan, and the name better associated with it today is the Revolution of Dignity. And that was a long process. It was a 93-day long revolution. And I was one of the people who was out there on the streets until the Yanukovych regime finally collapsed and Yanukovych fled to Russia. It was tough, and 5 days after Yanukovych left Ukraine and decided to take up residence in Russia, the Russians moved to take Crimea. And that was the beginning of the war, but it wasn't the beginning of the hot war. The beginning of the hot war was the Russian invasion of Ukraine's eastern provinces, the provinces of Donetsk and Lugansk, which also happened in 2014. And the reason I'm telling you this is because that event, the fact of there being a war, an active war being fought on mainland Ukraine, was one of the driving forces behind the creation of Lifeline Ukraine. So I said I'd tell you that story. But before I do, as a journalist, I'm published by many outlets. And the latest article that I've written is always my pinned tweet on Twitter or on X, for those of you who like to adopt Mr. Musk's terminology for the platform that he splurged $44 billion over. The founding of Lifeline Ukraine. Maybe because of my journalism, maybe because she was a friend of mine, maybe because of my background in business. The Minister of Health of Ukraine in 2018 was a lady called Dr. Uliana Supran. She's an American Ukrainian. I'd known her for a number of years. And one day the minister is reading a discussion email chain with various people within her ministry, and she replied, and she put me in copy, and she simply wrote, without any please, thank you, explanation, would you mind, nothing like that. She simply wrote, bring Paul Nyland into the next meeting on this. So the minister is asking you to go to a meeting, and you go to a meeting, and I turned up at the Ministry of Health, not knowing exactly what I was going to be presented with, but I sat around a table with half a dozen people, advisors to the minister, and they handed me a document that had been prepared by Lifeline Australia. And it was a series of recommendations for why we needed a suicide prevention hotline here in Ukraine. The first and most obvious one being that every country needs to have a suicide prevention hotline. All of you that are in the audience, all of you who are listening to this, I'm preaching to the converted. I know this is a summit about mental health preparedness in disaster situations. The biggest disaster that I think an individual can find themselves in is when they've come to a moment of severe emotional crisis and they're considering the awful possibility of taking their own life, doing some harm to themselves. So every country needs to have a suicide prevention hotline and an emotional crisis support structure. Ukraine had never had one. In the years, in the 2.5 decades then of Ukraine's independence following the breakup of the Soviet Union, nobody had ever created anything like this. And so I sat in June of 2018 in this meeting in the Ministry of Health, and I looked at the recommendations from Lifeline Australia, and there was a date on the front page of this document, and the date was June of 2017. And I looked at the people who were gathered and I said, this has been a year that the ministry has had these recommendations. Why has nobody done this? The simple answer was that it needed somebody to take responsibility for it. And again, maybe because of my journalism, maybe because I'm friends with the minister, maybe because of my business background, she had decided that maybe I was the person who would take responsibility for this. And a few days later, I had a meeting with somebody who's a professional in the world of suicide prevention. I was not. It was completely new to me. I don't have a background in psychology, but I'm a guy who can organize a thing. And as was evident from the writing that I'd done about the situation in Ukraine since 2014, since the seizure of Crimea, and since the outbreak of the Russian war in the Donbass, my writing shows that I'm dedicated to Ukraine. In fact, my T-shirt here says "We are Kiev." I'm dedicated to Ukraine, and I care passionately about the people who have fought to defend this country. And that was the initial goal of Lifeline Ukraine. We all know that veteran suicide is a known global disaster. The people who have gone to war for whatever reasons, they become deeply scarred, emotionally scarred by their experiences. And our first task was to be a support service for the men and women who had been fighting the Russian invasion, the Russian war in the Donbass since 2014. And now bear in mind, this is 2018 when I took on this challenge and I agreed to do this. And it was 1 year later, in the middle of 2019, that I'd worked out how to do it. I'd taken lessons from around the world on what we needed to do and how we needed to do it, including looking at the Veterans Affairs Office in the United States of America, and looking at how they serve the men and women who have served their country. And their mental health support hotline is a peer-to-peer structure. So it is veterans supporting veterans. And when I realized that I needed to employ veterans to support veterans, it meant that that was who my colleagues would be. And the idea of working alongside them and serving and helping the people who had been fighting for this country could not have been more rewarding for me. And I remember the very first, when we began, once we had secured our first funding, I remember we advertised for positions for the consultants that would come and work at the hotline. And we said, we're looking for veterans. And the first email that I got was from a lady called Svetlana, and she said, I'm not a veteran, I'm a psychologist, but my husband's a veteran. And I thought to myself, you are ideal. I definitely must meet you. And Svetlana certainly did become a part of the team. And so it was a coming together of mental health professionals who cared about veterans affairs and veterans who had an interest in and qualifications in the mental health sphere. And so we had this blended team, and our first mission, as I said, and our first funding was specifically to help veterans, to help the soldiers who'd been fighting in the Donbass. But it was always our intention that we would become the National Suicide Prevention Hotline for everybody, for all Ukrainians. And over time, we evolved to be that. And I remember in the period of our second grant that we had, which again was a grant that was specifically for veteran support and veteran rehabilitation. And I had a meeting with our colleagues from the organization called IREX that was the conduit for the grant. And one thing that one of the ladies said was, she said, look, this grant is to support veterans, and you're doing that, and you do that in sufficient numbers and in a very specific kind of way. And we're thrilled that you are meeting that mandate and fulfilling the reasons for allocating this grant to Lifeline Ukraine. But we also see that you're helping more people as well on top of that. And that, to us, she said, is a bonus. It's extra help that is being provided to the people of Ukraine, and the fact that we're funding that on top of the support that you do for veterans is fabulous. And so with that, we were evolving already to become the National Suicide Prevention Hotline for everybody in Ukraine. And I said in my introduction that I would talk about how the full-scale invasion has changed our work. And that's the part that I will come on to now. But I will say that I'm glad that we evolved before the full-scale invasion to become the suicide prevention hotline for everybody in Ukraine. And were known as that and had a national reputation in that space. Because what happened when the war expanded in February of 2022 was Lifeline Ukraine went from an organization that provided 1,000 instances of support every month to, by the end of 2022, having a demand to provide 5,000 instances of support every month. From 1,000 before the full-scale invasion to 5,000 by the end of 2022. Now that would put a strain on any organization. In our case in particular, we were especially strained because the people who are the consultants who are doing the hardest work at Lifeline Ukraine, the people who answer the calls, the people who are providing support, they themselves are victims of this war, victims of Russia's escalation of this war. And so the strain was extreme. And fortunately, we were given an opportunity to apply for a grant from USAID towards the end of 2022. I think it was September of 2022. And one of the things that USAID insisted on was they wanted to have elements of their funding be directed to things that would have a long-term impact. So beyond the operational funding for a certain period of time, they wanted to invest in things that would have a legacy of USAID's period of funding for Lifeline Ukraine. And so there were two things that I thought about. One was education, because once you take in education, once you take in knowledge, that stays there. That's not a one-off thing. And the other thing that I wanted to do as well is I wanted to create an online training course for everyday folk and teach people how to approach a conversation with somebody that they may be concerned about. It could be a friend, it could be a family member, it could be a co-worker, somebody who they see has changed in their outlook on life, changed in their mannerisms, changed uh, in their way of being. And there were several models that I'd looked at, and in fact, courses that I'd taken myself in my preparation to become the founder of a suicide prevention hotline. And we decided that we would create our own. And so there is a Lifeline Ukraine training course, which is online in the Ukrainian language. It's I believe it's been taken somewhere around 12,000 times since we created it. So there's 12,000 people who've equipped themselves with skills to be able to have a conversation with somebody if they notice that they're feeling down. In terms of the education that we took in, what I did was I looked at the changing needs of the organization as a result of the full scale invasion, and looked at the kind of things that would be having the most severe emotional impact, creating the most trauma among the people in Ukraine. Um, and I'll come back to that in a moment, but I mean, let me tell you a personal story about trauma. Where I'm sitting here now at home in my lounge on my sofa, and this is a quiet Sunday afternoon. It's quiet now, but while I'm recording this video and I have about 13 minutes left, there's every possibility the air raid siren might go off, because it just does all the time. And when those air raid sirens go off, there's a chance that death is coming your way. Missiles fly into this city regularly, and the constant and the constant pressure of that, the build up of that, it has an effect. It has an effect on all of us, and I'm not immune to this. I'm here. I'm a resident of Kiev. We are Kiev, as it says here on my T-shirt. But sitting here in October of 2025, one of these drones that you hear about impacted my building. And I'm on the 6th floor of an 8th floor apartment building. And the impact was directly into the 8th story, right above my head. And the apartments that were there were obliterated. When you think of drones, you might think of a quadcopter, something that you can buy off Amazon, something that you can fly around your local area to take a look at what's going on around you from above. But the drones that hit Ukraine every day, they are flying bombs. They are the size of a car. They carry huge explosive warheads, and the apartments 2 floors above my head no longer exist. Fortunately, at the moment of impact, they were empty. There was nobody at home. But had there been somebody at home, they would have been killed. My neighbors would have died. I could have died. As it was, my windows all blew open from the blast wave. The moment of the impact, the fireball that I saw reflected in the glass on the other side of my apartment complex across the car park from where I'm sitting, where I'm still looking, there is plywood covering, I've counted it, 28 windows still to this day from an impact 10 months ago. My windows all blew open. My family photographs that sit on my windowsill, some of the frames were broken. And since that experience, I react in a different way to loud noises now. And so I know firsthand what it's like when something like that happens. And so there are many traumas that are affecting the people of Ukraine. Um, and again, I'm not immune to that. But the kind of traumas that we had to prepare for with our USAID funding when we decided to spend that a portion of that grant, one of the line items of that grant on education, was we brought in the very best experts in the Ukrainian context of understanding how women particularly are affected by war, because that was one of the categories of calls that we found we were experiencing a big spike in. Women and how they are affected. Maybe their husbands have volunteered to go and fight. Maybe their husbands have been mobilized into the armed forces. Maybe they've had to go overseas to protect their children, to take their children out of harm's way, and therefore their families have been separated. So that was one of the things that we prepared for. We did a training course as well on how we can support people who have been tortured in Russian captivity. When Russia has occupied further parts of Ukraine in the early stages of the big war in February of 2022, the local residents were put through a process which is it's too softly named. It's called filtration, and it sounds like they're looking for who might be undesirables, who might be against Russian rules suddenly being imposed on them, their families, their cities. And those people who were believed to have a patriotic passion for the country that they were born in, those people predominantly have suffered torture at the hands of the Russian occupiers. And so that was one of the things that we prepared for. And another one of the things that we had to take in specialist knowledge about was how we treat the victims of sexual violence. That is another thing that the Russian occupiers, the Russian army, have brutally done in every place where they've occupied. And as we were sitting and having a conversation with colleagues in Washington, D.C., about these training courses, when we mentioned the one about how we are better, how we're going to better equip ourselves to be able to support victims of conflict related sexual violence, one of our colleagues in Washington, D.C. asked, "Is that something that you expect you're going to encounter?" And my project manager, Anastasia, sitting next to me, simply responded, "We already are." So in the full-scale invasion, we had to adapt to a much greater demand for support from Lifeline Ukraine, and we had to adapt to the new realities of what was facing Ukraine as well. And I told you my personal experience of my apartment building being directly hit by a flying bomb. The fact of the matter is that everybody who has been in Ukraine throughout this brutal period in this country's history, everybody's affected. Everybody is strained. Everybody is carrying some kind of trauma. And the last thing that I said I was going to tell you is where Lifeline Ukraine is now and what are our plans for the future. Well, despite what I've told you about the need for Lifeline Ukraine and how we've adapted to support the people of Ukraine during these difficult times, the fact of the matter is, due to a lack of financial resources, currently the work of the hotline is postponed. It is suspended. And it seems insane, and it probably seems crazy to those of you who are listening to this video, but yes, money, or a lack thereof, is actually the thing that is stopping us from saving lives on a daily basis? Money. So what I've been doing in this pause, in this period where we're not operational, is I've been thinking about ways in which I can secure the long-term stable functioning of Lifeline Ukraine. And so what I'm currently in the process of doing is I'm building a foundation. And it's called the Lifeline Ukraine Foundation. A better word in the English language, it's not a commonly used term here, but a better word in the English language is an endowment. And you know, for example, many universities fund their operations based on endowments. They have large sums of money that have been gifted to them over the years that they've been operational. And that money is invested, and they take the interest from that money alone. They leave the capital, and they take the interest to cover certain expenses, extensions, renovations, new equipment, whatever it might be. And so that's what I'm going to do. I'm currently building a foundation of 2.5 million euros. That capital sum, 2.5 million euros, is going to come from 250 donors. My expectation is that most of them are going to be Ukrainian corporate donors. They're going to be Ukrainian firms who maybe they care about mental health particularly. Maybe they might have lost a colleague through suicide, and so this particularly resonates with them. But Ukrainians and supporters of Ukraine are being invited to become a founder at Lifeline Ukraine. And each of those 250 founders will contribute 10,000 euros. And that money, that capital, is then going to be invested. And we will be operational for many years to come, simply with the interest that we're able to earn on that capital sum on an annual basis. So no longer will we be dependent on the international grant sphere, although they have been very good to us. I mentioned USAID. Other funders have included the British Embassy here in Kiev, an American organization called Global Giving. We've had a lot of support from the international community, but now it's time for the Ukrainian community to stand up and to support the Ukrainian National Suicide Prevention Hotline. And so that's what my plan is. That's what I'm doing. I am certain that there are people in this audience listening to this message, which is soon going to end. You'll be pleased to know. Coming to the end of my allotted 30 minutes. I'm sure there are people in the audience listening to this message who simply care enough about the nature of the work that we do, who care enough about mental health support, who maybe are seeing from afar the horrors that are being meted out on Ukraine. And I hope I've helped you to understand some of them a little bit better with this speech today. And maybe some of you will care enough to also look to your communities or look to your organizations and think about ways in which you can support Lifeline Ukraine or become one of the 250 founders at Lifeline Ukraine. For those of you who would like to get in touch with me, my email address is very simple. It is simply paul@lifelineukraine.com. My telephone number is a Ukrainian number. I've been here for 25 years, by the way, and I could make a joke and say I had no grey hairs when I arrived, but that's not true. I was already grey when I came to Ukraine 25 years ago. So my telephone number, the international access code is 380, and that is therefore 380-50-391-8642. And you can find me on WhatsApp or any of the common messenger platforms. And I would be happy to speak with you, to meet with you, to discuss ways in which we can be of mutual support and at the same time provide support to the people of Ukraine through Lifeline Ukraine. I thank the organization, the organizers, for giving me this opportunity to speak to you. I thank each and every one of you for your attention, and I'm looking forward to further communications.
Hello, My name is Michael Reisman. I am speaking to you today from the state of New York in the United States of America. I am so honored and pleased to have been asked to make this presentation to you as part of the Disaster Mental Health Pre-Summit component of TUFH 2026. My topic will be Healing Through the Body, Drama Therapy Techniques to Address Trauma in War Zones. Just a bit of background about me. I was a practicing drama therapist for 10 years in the United States and in Czechia. I worked in hospitals and clinics, primarily with folks with chronic mental health conditions, such as major depression, bipolar disorder, and schizophrenia. I also was a private practice therapist in clinics. Among the populations I worked with were people who had experienced trauma. Now, in terms of drama therapy, I spent 4 years in the Czech Republic as a drama therapist and helped develop the field of drama therapy in that country. I taught workshops in Czechia, in Serbia, Montenegro, Poland, and Ireland, as well as in the United States. Now, for the last 20 years, I have worked as a lawyer, primarily in the governmental sector, promoting and ensuring improved access to mental health and addiction treatment. So I began going to Ukraine as a volunteer shortly after the full-scale Russian invasion in February 2022. Over the last 2.5 years, I have focused on teaching drama therapy techniques in a variety of places, including Lviv, the capital city, Kyiv, and Kharkiv in the Northeast. I have so far taught 66 workshops with a total of 1,300 participants, including mental health workers, psychology and theater students, internally displaced persons, and veterans. Now, a couple of things about this session to remember. First of all, it is not therapy. We are going to be experiencing in a few minutes some techniques that are part of drama therapy. Now, when I make these presentations, these workshops in Ukraine, I am very clear to say as well that it's not therapy. I do recommend that if people feel strongly about the techniques or if the techniques have impacted them, that they seek advice from a mental health professional. And I would do the same with you today. Now, it's not therapy, but the techniques may be therapeutic. The other thing which is related is that the first rule of medicine, and I think it's my first rule of teaching these techniques in these workshops, is to do no harm. I assume people, especially in Ukraine, have experienced trauma, perhaps complex trauma. I also do not want to underestimate their ability to express themselves as human beings. So there's a balance there between being cautious and providing people with a vehicle to express themselves. Now, for you watching this webinar, I hope that you at least take away some techniques that you may use in a variety of settings, even if you have no intention of ever studying drama therapy or becoming a drama therapist. It's really an a la carte menu that I will offer. Now I'm going to present some background information. As I mentioned, I have taught workshops in Ukraine in the city of Kharkiv, which is in the Northeast, as contrasted to the city of Lviv, which is in the far Northwest, very close to Poland. Now, Kharkiv is 30 kilometers from the front, from the Russian border. It has been hit repeatedly almost every day since the full-scale Russian invasion began. On the left, you see a photo of a building that was an apartment building in the center of Kharkiv, just a block away from Maidan Svobody, which is the Freedom Square in the center. On the right, you see a machine that dispenses solotka vata, which in American English is cotton candy. That machine sits in Shevchenko Park about 500 meters away from the building on the left. I show this slide to illustrate the duality of life in Ukraine, in the war zone that the entire country is and has been for 4 years. But this concept, I think, is applicable to other war zones because the duality is we have immense destruction and death, which is tragic, of course, that people live with every day. And myself, I have been to Kharkiv 4 times over the last 2 years, and I've experienced firsthand relentless air raid sirens, waking up in the middle of the night to explosions, seeing horrible things outside the window. Uh, but on the other hand, there is the human capacity for joy that is illustrated in the cotton candy machine. I have spent hours walking in the park, and I go back to that cotton candy machine every time I visit Kharkiv to see parents, mothers with their children having a good time or trying in some way to do things that resemble a normal life. Uh, so, in terms of trauma, it's impossible to talk about trauma without mentioning Bessel van der Kolk. His book, The Body Keeps the Score, which was published in English in 2014, has become a classic. The basic thesis of Dr. van der Kolk is that the memory of trauma is encoded in the body. So if we truly want to get to the root of trauma in each individual, we have to access their bodily processes, and we have to do things, hopefully with them, that will allow them to have a physical experience that allows them to at least process and in some way release their trauma. Now, one thing that's really fascinating about the book, The Body Keeps the Score, is that the last chapter is not devoted to neuroscience like much of the rest of the book. It is devoted to theater. So Dr. van der Kolk writes that theater is a way of allowing people to embody their emotions, to give voice to their emotions, and to become engaged rhythmically, taking on and embodying different roles. Now, to be clear, Dr. van der Kolk is not a drama therapist, but he does have in the book some examples of theater in the community, therapeutic theater, that are very resonant with me and with many drama therapists out there. So, what is drama therapy? The North American Drama Therapy Association defines it as the deliberate use of drama and/or theatrical processes to achieve therapeutic goals. Three of the most important for our purposes are: first, to safely express and contain emotions; second, to reduce stress and anxiety; and third, to rehearse adaptive behaviors. That's the role-playing part of drama therapy, which is also you see in psychodrama and even various types of psychoeducational training out there. I think another important goal that I've written about is to empower individuals to take control of their lives. So the mode of drama therapy, the model, the technique that I practice is called developmental transformations. It is an improvisational, embodied form of drama therapy. Unlike psychodrama, it doesn't work from a particular past story or future projection. It doesn't involve masks, puppets, or costumes. It was created almost 50 years ago by Dr. David Reed Johnson at Yale Medical School. He also ran a PTSD unit for Vietnam War veterans at the VA, the Veterans Administration Hospital close by New Haven. It has an individual and group protocol. There's an entrance structure, which gives way to unison sound and movement, eventually to structured and unstructured role play, and then there's an exit structure. The theoretical framework of developmental transformations draws on a variety of schools of psychological thought: developmental, psychodynamic, existential, and cognitive behavioral. So when I teach these workshops in Ukraine, as I mentioned, I sometimes call it drama therapy just to give people a sense of where it fits into the world of psychology. But I emphasize that what I'm doing with people is really drama for stress reduction. Uh, my goal, first and foremost, is to create a safe, consensual, imaginative play space where we can have fun, but we can also address some very serious emotions like anger and sadness. We explore emotions through movement and sound, images generated by group members, and improvisational scenes. One aspect of this method of my stress reduction for drama for stress reduction, which draws on developmental transformations, is that the leader actively participates. The leader doesn't stand on the sidelines as in a play, director of a play. The leader is involved, adjusting the degree of structure and challenge, at the same time maintaining safety. I think of this as free association in motion, or even quite simply just mental hygiene. So at this point, I would like to get into the experiential session. Now, these techniques that we're going to do now are adapted from what is done in person. So first, if I am working with a group, but I'll say this to you as the viewer, uh, does it feel like sometimes there's a dark cloud over us, over you, with all the stuff going on in the world every day, in our families, with our friends? It's just a lot of burdens that we have. Does it feel that way sometimes, even just a little bit? Okay, okay. Well, let's reach up and together, together, we're going to grab that dark cloud, okay? On the count of three. One, two, three. Okay, let's get it. Okay, good, good, good. And now, and I know, look, I know this is very silly. This is very silly, but stick with me. Okay. So we grab that dark cloud and let's push it back behind us out of the way. Okay. On three. One, two, three. Okay, good, 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 good. Okay, good, good, good. Yes, excellent. Okay. And now, and this is even sillier. I know it's childish. Can we do something childish? Okay, okay. I'll take that as a yes. So let us now imagine a magic curtain above us, okay? What color is the curtain today? It can be any color you would like it to be. So just think right now of a color you would like that curtain to be. Red, orange, green. It could be a multicolored curtain. And on the count of three, with a sound like this, a hum sound, we are going to bring that curtain down. One, two, three. Mm. Okay, very good. Now, um, just make an opening in the curtain for yourself. And you can do this in your chair if you feel like standing up. You can do that too. I'm going to stand up right now and open that curtain. And now take a step through the curtain inside. So we're all going to be inside this magic curtain of many colors. Okay. And now, and again, you can stand or you can sit. We're just going to breathe. Take in nice, normal breaths. Okay, good. And now breathe in on the count of four. One, two, three, four. And breathe out on a count of eight. One, two, three, four, five, six, seven, eight. Good. And as you breathe, try to breathe in and feel the air filling your diaphragm and your belly. So again, breathe in on four, breathe out on eight. Breathe in, one, two, three, four. Breathe out on eight. One, two, three, four, five, six, seven, eight. Good. And now just let that go. And of course, this type of breathing technique, and there are variations such as box breathing, which involve holding the breath, are perhaps more and more commonly known in stress reduction, anxiety management, because they activate the parasympathetic nervous system. But for now, we're just going to continue warming ourselves up. Let's just do some shoulder rolls. Good. And keep breathing just normally. You don't have to count your breaths. Roll your shoulders back and now roll them forward. Good. And you can do figure eights with your shoulders and change direction. Good. And keep breathing from your diaphragm and just tilt your head to the left. Breathe in and breathe out. And now let your head tilt to the right. Good. And keep breathing. And now come to center. And now just stretch your arms out to the right, on the right side and the left side. Now, if we were in a group at this point, I would invite people to look into each other's eyes and reach out to the eyes of people on the opposite side of the circle. And every time I do this, at that moment in the group, people who may have come into the session with no affect or just blank face, they are activated because there's something about giving people permission, inviting people to look in the eyes of others while physically doing something that's gentle and easy and safe. It really changes the dynamic very quickly. Okay. And now just reach out a little bit more. And yes, this is very silly. It's very simple. This is like theater acting class 101, but this is something that can reduce people's stress very quickly and bring a group of people who may have never met each other before into some sense of cohesion. Okay. And now, I invite you to, if you haven't stood up already, to stand up and just move around a little bit. And again, if we were in a group setting or in a room, we would have some space. Sometimes I do this in very small spaces, but this is just, again, about activating the body and also getting people to engage with each other a little bit. So now, because it's just you and me, we can engage with each other. We can move a little bit. You can follow me. I'm imagining that you're there following me as well, or I'm going to follow you. And we move around, we make eye contact. And at this point, I would invite you just to come to stillness and just relax your arms, relax your body, wherever you are, whatever is happening in your life right now. Just take a moment. And I find it's better to keep the eyes open. So we have the dual awareness. We're in a space, but we're also not in the space. Focus on the sounds outside the room, if there are any. Maybe people outside your office, outside your house, if you're home. Now focus on the sounds that are inside the room. And now focus on the sounds that are inside your head. Now, the key to this is not to judge. When I say sounds inside your head, I mean literally the voice, could be the voice inside your head that's telling you that, okay, my voice is telling me that I have 10 minutes left in this session. Your voice might be telling you I have all these sorts of things to do, and here I am in this session and can't concentrate. And that is okay. Whatever thoughts come into your mind are okay. Okay. And we'll just let that go. And now I am going to ask you to imagine that in the space that you're in, uh, there is a line running down the center of the space, like a thermometer. I call this the emotional thermometer. At one end, we have zero, zero, which is really bad or not very good or bad. And then at the other end, we have 100, which is really good. So we have really bad, really good, and then 50% in the middle. So my question for you now is, how are you feeling right now in this moment, physically, emotionally, and spiritually? How are you feeling physically, emotionally, and spiritually? And again, if we were in a room with a group of people, we'd be moving around. I invite people to test out different spots on the line from 0 to 100, but to have a precise spot in mind from 0 to 100. And find your spot, find the spot, and just right now you can even say it aloud, the number of the spot that you're on. I'm going to say my spot right now is 80%, right? Because I was a bit nervous about doing this presentation. I practiced and practiced. I did a couple of dry runs and I did a couple of takes that I cut. And here we are, I think, getting into this, and I hope you're getting into it. And just say that number out loud, whatever that number is. Again, if I were doing this in a session with a group, I might ask people if they're in the right place. I might ask why they're in that position. And if someone is at 100, and there usually always is, what their secret is. I try to make it a little bit fun. Uh, on the other hand, there are often people that are at zero or close to zero. So I ask them if they would like to share something about why they chose that spot. I don't push it. Sometimes people say no, they don't want to say anything, and I just respect that. But there is something about sharing and witnessing without too many words, without too much discussion, that's very powerful. Now, for the next technique, which follows on the emotional thermometer, I think it's best for our purposes to just sit in the chair. Um, so I ask you now, we're going to do some sculptures or statues with our faces and our bodies to express our feelings or to show how we feel. So a gesture showing the emotion in sculpture can be something like this, okay? This is how I feel right now. Let's get my hands together. Okay. And do this for yourself. Just take a moment to do it for yourself. Show how you're feeling right now, okay? Good, good. And just let that go. And now let's do a different sculpture. This one is to show how you'd like to feel, to get you out of the feeling that you just showed in the first sculpture. So you might start with that first sculpture, okay? And you might even add a sound to it. So I'm going to add a sound to mine. Ha, ha, ha. It's kind of a reaching sound, maybe a little bit uncertain. So do that for yourself to get from this original sound to something that is better for you, whatever that means. And so here is my better sculpture, my better emotion. Hmm, hmm. And I'm going to add something with my arms. Yeah, that's my better sculpture. Okay, so just do that for yourself for a moment. Some icons are flashing on my screen, which is kind of funny. But go from that first gesture, which for me was maybe a little bit uncertain and reaching, to something that's more like this. We all know what this means, okay? Okay. Hmm. Okay, good. So we've done this exercise. This is a classic drama therapy exercise to go from showing your emotion in a sculpture, and we could even limit it just to the face, just to facial gestures. But I think involving other parts of the body is also makes it more meaningful, more powerful, activates the body, activates the emotion. Now, because we don't have much more time, I will just sort of skip to an exercise that I do with almost every group where this is after we've been moving in unison. So the gestures that I showed earlier, that might be the beginning of actually getting into a group rhythm where each person begins a movement and the rest of the group repeats it. Okay, which is very important that each person gets to show an emotion, show a movement which can express an emotion. They are validated by because other people mirror their movements. But eventually we get into a mode where we want to do something and people are moving around the room and it becomes a journey. So let's imagine right now that we've been moving for a while. You've been doing these great movements and these gestures, showing how you feel, showing how you want to feel. And we can ride on a magic carpet. This is part of the drama therapy world, the drama world, that we can invent these things in our minds and think of a place right now where you would like to travel. Now, this can be a real place that you've actually been to, or it can be just an imaginary place. It can be a very familiar place, like a favorite room in your home. So just think of that place right now where you'd like to be. Okay. And let's go there. Let's go to that place where you would like to be, where you feel safe, where you feel relaxed, where you feel loved. And let's just go to that place together right now. Okay. And, if we were in a room, we'd be walking maybe, and we could then sit down. We could sit in a chair. We could sit on the floor. We could lie on the floor. Now, very often in Ukraine, people want to travel to the beach. They want to go to Crimea, which is something that even younger people remember from their childhood, from vacationing at the beach. There's something very soothing about the sand, about the sound of the waves, about people cooking food, barbecuing on the beach. But whatever the place that you would like to go to, would like to travel to right now is okay. So I invite you just to be there in that place where you want to be, where you feel safe, you feel relaxed, and we're there together. And just think about how that sounds. Are there sounds there? How does it smell? Does it smell like cooking? Does it smell like the salty sea air? Does it smell like the mountains? Does it smell like perfume? Do you hear people talking? How does the air feel? Does it feel hot? Does it feel cold? Does it feel just right? So just take that in, that place where you'd like to be. Are there things that you'd like to do here? I mean, is it a city? Are there museums? Are there historical places to visit? Or is it just somewhere you can go where you don't have to do anything at all? Okay. And if it's the latter, you can just keep doing what you're doing right now, just being there, being in that safe place where you would like to be. Okay. And so now we're going to come back from that safe place. We're going to take what we experienced in that safe place and just in a group, I would ask people to actually call out all the things that they've experienced during the session. So I'll do that for you and I right now. So we had some physical warm-ups. We had some gestures showing how we feel. We had movement. We had the emotional thermometer. We had a trip somewhere where we would like to go to feel safe. So let's just gather all of that together right now. And we're going to stand up, and I invite you to stand, and we're going to find that magic curtain behind us, and we're going to step through it and raise it up to the ceiling on the count of three. 1, 2, 3. And good. And now we come back to ourselves, to where we started. And uh, I always leave time after an experience like this with a group to have some verbal processing, in part to make sure that people are returned, that they've come back mentally, physically to the place where we started, but also to give people the opportunity to talk about what it was like for them. So I invite you to think about what this experience was like for you for the last few minutes, this version of online drama therapy techniques, what you liked, what you didn't like about it, and it's all okay. So with that, I thank you very much for your time, your involvement, and I wish you the best of luck, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the conference. Take care.
Greetings and salutations. Thank you for your attention. My name is Grant Brenner, and I'm going to be here with you virtually and in solidarity. It's a genuine honor to present at TUFH 2026 under a theme of community and unity. Among other things, I work at the intersection of disaster behavioral health and psychiatry. I'm trained as a psychoanalyst and have been doing volunteer work for a quarter of a century. Disasters have become a fixture of everyday life. They overlap, they recur, and they land on communities that are already carrying chronic stress. The pandemic didn't wait for the wildfire season to end. The typhoon doesn't wait for the last recovery to finish. We'll focus on key questions about artificial intelligence and disaster behavioral health. What are good uses? What might be misuse? And importantly, how do we maintain discipline to monitor and assess as AI rapidly enters the picture, a potential cause itself of disasters? We'll look at current evidence, a range of hypotheticals, and future directions. Here's the frame for everything that follows. The central question is simple to say, but hard to answer. Can AI advance disaster behavioral health outcomes while mitigating the potential and often unanticipatable risks? Let me define both ends. Proper use of AI would measurably advance documented disaster behavioral health functional outcomes, doing so under humane and human governance. Let's discuss some forms of misuse, surveillance dressed as care, pseudotherapy that imitates a relationship it can't hold, and autonomous clinical decision-making that removes the human just where the human is most needed. The path through the talk is a single zoom. We start course at systems and global health, we'll move to the middle, community and phase, and we will end fine-grained at the individual and the tool in the person's hand. At each level, I'll pair a genuine use with its characteristic misuse, because they're the same capability pointed in two different ways. Keep that pairing in your mind as we go. By the end, I want us to be able to look at any new tool and ask, for this capability, what's useful, and are there potential misuses hidden in the potential beneficial cases? As with many other interventions where benefit can backfire, with AI, both are often possible. First, the terrain. Disasters are cyclical and overlapping. The old picture, one event, one community, a clean return to baseline, no longer describes the world our patients and those we serve live in. They overlap, they recur, and they compound on chronic stress, poverty, displacement, distrust, prior trauma. These are loops, not single arcs. The impact of one wave becomes anticipation of the next. Resilient health systems is the conference theme precisely because the waves keep coming. So what's the role of disaster behavioral health across that cycle? It's psychosocial support before, during, and after for people, for families, for responders, and for whole communities. And it's just as important to say what disaster behavioral health isn't, though it has elements of all of these. It's not emergency medicine, it's not incident command, it's not local leadership, and it's not giving diagnoses for expected and normal responses. It's important to be clear in our work about what we can and cannot promise, and what we will or won't be offering. We strive to protect and restore adaptive function across the whole disaster cycle. Trust is built on credible and timely communication, stating and meeting expectations, and showing cultural humility. I've organized this talk around a working model of functional outcomes, because with AI engineering, functional outcomes are the gold standard for understanding whether what we do is worthwhile or a strain on already scarce resources. This pyramid shows a ladder of disaster behavioral health functional outcomes, all of which in principle can be measured and optimized. We have to note, however, that outcome research is lacking in disaster work, so that what I can present is based on existing evidence, expert consensus, and best practices. At the base, Tier 0, safety and survival. Tier 1, acute stabilization, the psychological first aid window. Tier 2, regulation, efficacy, and connection. Tier 3, functional recovery built on skills for psychological recovery and related programs. Tier 4, escalation and specialist referral, governed and human. Tier 5, disorder prevention, supervised. And Tier 6 at the top, community resilience, meaning, post-traumatic growth, and prevention of disaster. So when we talk about AI during this presentation, consider how any given use case impacts functional outcomes. Note that this framework is a way of organizing information and not a model for triage or resource allocation, though resource allocation itself is a functional outcome for systems. How well are limited resources allocated? These tiers are anchored in the established frameworks NCT-SN and the National Center for PTSD, SAMHSA's DTAC, and the World Health Organization and IASC Mental Health and Psychosocial Support Guidance. Ask of every proposed feature 2 questions. Which tier does this serve, and how would we know if it actually worked? The second anchor is just as important. The field isn't waiting for AI to tell it what works. Best practices already exist, and to an extent, they're evidence-based. Psychological first aid covers the days to weeks impact window. Its logic is a sequence. Contact, then safety, then needs, then practical help, then connection, then coping information, then linkage. Some of you will know it as the 5 C's. Cover, calm, connect, competence, confidence. Skills for psychological recovery covers the weeks to months window. Problem solving, positive activities, managing reactions, helpful thinking, social reconnection. It's skills building, not treatment. Around both sits the IASC Mental Health and Psychosocial Support Pyramid, layering supports from basic services to community and family supports to focused non-specialized care to specialized services, and running through all of it the 5 essential elements: safety, calming, efficacy, connectedness, and hope. Any credible role for AI has to attach to one of these established practices to extend them, not replace them, and not reinvent them under a fashionable new name, much as new names are fire. Let's start with the view from the top of the spire. Coarse grain first. Use and misuse at population scale. There are already systems at work. The World Health Organization's EIOS 2.0, AI-Enhanced Epidemic Intelligence, launched in 2025, gives us earlier warning and better situational awareness for response. The crisis text line's machine learning triage flags roughly 86% of imminent risk texters from their earliest messages across millions of conversations while humans make the decision. That is safety and community resilience at scale with a person in the loop. As long as it works. Continuous improvement is the name of the game, always learning. There is also misuse risk at this high level. Misuse, which is anxiety-provoking for a variety of reasons, not the least of which is how hard many of these factors are to safeguard against. Population surveillance, algorithmic bias, fragmented reactive systems that generate false confidence, and the deepest one, AI itself as a disaster driver. misinformation and synthetic media at scale, automation failures, AI-related psychiatric harms. A third hazard class, standing alongside natural and human-made disasters. That last category, AI as a hazard in its own right, is the newest and probably the easiest to underestimate. Given a patchy regulatory framework, emerging data on the impact of AI, and the overall lack of consensus, as well as the exigency of the AI arms race, each group has to develop its own AI disaster plan. I emphasize this because it changes our whole responsibility. We're not only asking whether AI can help in disasters, we're asking how to keep AI, as we would any technology risk, from doing unintended harm in our own backyard, as well as systemically. Sustainability thinking, that real long-term thinking about where we want to be many years down the road, is important to cultivate to best serve population health. Before we go further, a quick reality check. This table is what's actually deployed with its evidence and corresponding safety levels. Quick orientation before the numbers. That safety level column runs 1 to 6, and higher means more governance is required. In plain terms, Level 1 is general purpose AI with no clinical role. Level 2 is information only. Level 3 is a supportive tool with a human overseeing it. Level 4 is a clinical adjunct used by licensed professionals. Level 5 is an autonomous agent under co-managed care. And Level 6 is experimental, research only. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. We'll review the full scale in more detail in just a minute. There are safety levels I made and used to organize in my own head, but are not used throughout the industry. Crisis text lines triage routes the highest risk texters to human counselors. It's peer reviewed and it sits at safety level 3 to 4. The VA's PTSD coach and COVID coach deliver psychoeducation and self-management built for disasters with randomized and observational evidence at level 2 to 3. WHO's Step-by-Step and Self-Help Plus provide guided digital support for refugees backed by multiple randomized trials at level 3. The CBT-adjacent chatbots Wobot, WISA, Limbic show modest short-term results with NHS intake routing in one case at level 3 to 4. And gender-based violence support chatbots in conflict and humanitarian settings, where the data so far suggests that the benefits don't yet outweigh the risks. Notice the pattern. Everything deployed is at safety levels 2 to 4. Always a human in the loop, nothing fully autonomous. One bit of info here is worth underlining. As of October 2025, the US FDA lists about 1,357 AI-enabled medical devices, the vast majority in radiology, but it has authored 0 generative AI devices for any clinical purpose, including mental health. And a quick word on a name you'll recognize in that table. Wobot, one of the most studied mental health chatbots, retired its consumer app in June 2025 and pivoted to B2B licensing. So if you hear that it's back, that's the enterprise side, not a consumer relaunch. And across the refugee trials, guided formats tend to outperform self-guided. I share this not to discourage innovation, but to calibrate it. Deploy where the evidence and the safeguards already reach. Treat everything beyond that line as research, and label it that way plainly. Now for the middle layer of complexity, community and phase, looking at mid-level systems and organizations. AI could help conceptualize and track aggregate stress load and resource signals, what the model for adaptive response to complex cyclical disasters calls the community balance sheet. Phase-aware, needs-aligned, navigation that points people to the right support at the right time, and equity-oriented visibility of the gaps, seeing who's being missed. The misuse is the very same capability turned on the individual risk scoring and vulnerability flags, stigma and cultural flattening, where a model trained elsewhere misreads a community, and the quiet drift where aggregate slowly becomes surveillance. Heat maps used for population health are careful not to be able to identify down to the individual level, though there are inherent risks that pinpointing a household as adjacent to identifying persons. The design for this whole level fits in a sentence. Community level signal, never individual scoring. This is the layer that serves collective efficacy and connection. This fits well with compassionate care for all. There can be a temptation to make guesses about individuals from community level data in order to help people, and it would be possible to pull this signal out of the data in many instances. Ethical considerations around rights to privacy and the dangers we face when guardrails buckle call for governance layers not just around AI access, but inference. The finest grain now, the individual and the tool, one person helping another person with something at their fingertips. AI's proper place for current thinking is around the helper, never in the helper's chair. The legitimate uses are supported: vetted guidance and actionable information, drafting and translation for human review, psychological first aid and skills for psychological recovery skill reminders, offline mini-libraries for when connectivity fails to maintain service. And the evidence points the same way. Across displaced person trials, guided support tends to beat self-guided. A case can be made for high autonomy AI systems for areas where there is insufficient or absent human-mediated support, and such systems can fill gaps in service but require more stringent safety testing, akin to self-driving vehicles. The misuses at this level are the most personal and often the most dangerous. Pseudotherapy and emotional dependency over standardized empathy that flattens real relationship, a chatbot mirroring a person's panic at 2 in the morning, unsupervised crisis advice offered with no confidence and accountability. So the line holds. The helper remains in charge. This layer, for example, could scaffold psychological first aid and skills for recovery. AI extends reach. It doesn't replace presence. Right now, we think about a well-designed smartphone app, perhaps living inside spaces like WhatsApp and Telegram, offering individual support, oddly perhaps sitting side by side with streaming video from war zones, organic information exchange, and real-time efforts of people trying to locate and connect with loved ones. Let's look at an example of where AI didn't show benefit: support for survivors of gender-based violence in crisis settings, illustrating a number of key points and highlighting the need for better support for groups at risk. The anchor finding is a measured one. A recent analysis suggests that for AI chatbots supporting survivors of gender-based violence in conflict and humanitarian emergencies, the benefits may not yet outweigh the risks. Similar patterns come up wherever people are vulnerable. 4 risks are worth naming, and each one generalizes well beyond this example. First, data exposure, where mandatory reporting or surveillance regimes exist. Someone disclosing to a chatbot may unintentionally share sensitive information more widely than they intended, which can raise their risk. Second, algorithmic bias. Language models can reflect societal bias and may respond with stereotyped or inadequate language just when nuance matters most. Third, emotional inadequacy. Trauma disclosure calls for trained human sensitivity that a model isn't equipped to provide. Fourth, relationship displacement. Leaning too heavily on a tool can crowd out the human support people genuinely need. So the guidance at this edge is clear, and it follows established humanitarian practice. Lowest autonomy, human-led, privacy by design. That's the boundary for a well-governed tool. The purpose isn't to single out one group, it's to learn from the highest stakes edge, respectfully and with compassion. If a use can meet the bar here, the same principles and lessons can help with more broadly safe designs. AI systems need to be tested across different groups. There are many examples in healthcare of where something which worked in one hospital did not apply in another, for example. AI safety levels in mental health broadly sketches 6 safety levels. It grades governance by autonomy, clinical adjacency, and risk. This is a model I developed for categorization purposes, but is not a tested, widely used model. Level 1, no clinical relevance, general purpose AI, basic ethics. Level 2, informational use only, education and resources with disclaimers and expert review. Level 3, supportive interaction tools, human oversight mandatory, and barred in high acuity settings. Level 4, clinical adjunct systems, licensed professionals, transparent and validated. Level 5, autonomous mental health agents, co-managed care with mandatory human oversight. And Level 6, experimental super alignment, research environments only, under the strictest control. If we look at all the examples discussed so far, they've fallen in the middle of the ASL mental health scale. Nothing designed for these use cases is running autonomously, and a human being is always somewhere in the loop. The engineering problem of when an agent knows to escalate to a human is a key consideration, requiring good design and testing and deterministic rules whenever possible, rather than machine judgment. So responsible practice here isn't only about autonomy, it's about well-governed assistance with a human who stays accountable. Again, this may not always be the case, especially when the choice is between imperfect AI systems and, after all, human systems are also imperfect, and nothing at all. Especially in the midst of chaos, practitioners and responders need something that structures our own process, whether we're evaluating a tool for workflow or responding to a client who's already using an AI tool. Guide can be a useful guide. Another tool I developed with colleagues to help organize how we think about clinical and related AI tools. Here's how it goes. G is gather. Screen for AI use with the same seriousness you screen for sleep, substance use, or anything else. It belongs in the history. Understand, weigh the risks and benefits for this person and this tool. Vulnerability matters and it changes the calculus. Inform. Give plain language limits, describe the tool's role relative to care, and use a harm reduction framing rather than being judgmental. Motivational interviewing skills can help here. Document. As appropriate, put consent, boundaries, and safety protocols in the record, if there is one, following proper procedures. Finally, E. Evaluate. Monitor the alliance, the outcomes, and the platform's changes, and reassess continually, because the tool you learned about last month may have changed since then. Guide is simple. Safe adoption protects every tier of the functional outcome pyramid through human oversight and awareness. Let's turn now to how we model disasters over time, because the complexity of our models shapes how we are able to understand and deal with complex events. The classic curve many are familiar with was groundbreaking, showing a comprehensible sequence. The pre-disaster phase, then impact, the heroic phase, the honeymoon, the hard drop into disillusionment, and anniversary reactions. Finally, the long reconstruction back toward baseline. There's a lot of wisdom here, expecting hard times and being ready to recover. It's a humane and useful curve, and it remains an anchor like the classic stages of grief. Its central assumption, one event, one community, and a linear return to baseline. This is helpful, but when confronted with the many overlapping disasters in the last decades, colleagues and I have found the classic model didn't always fit as well for all communities. Where do we go when disasters and crisis become, to borrow the words of author Jorge Luis Borges, a garden of forking paths? Pandemic waves, typhoon seasons, conflict, displacement, the next event arrives in the middle of recovery. When the curve never gets to finish, we need a model built for loops. And over time, we want to influence those loops so they tend to cycle upward rather than spiral downward. Honoring the classic while naming its limit recalls how we approach AI. Times change, the world changes, models change. We want to keep what works and build better systems using precise methods for learning and updating. How systems develop is beyond the scope of this presentation, but I'll mention causal emergence, a recent model of how causality can build layer over layer from the tiniest to the largest so that we can account for what kind of effective information lives at which layer of organization. Understanding causality in complex systems allows us to work out where the levers are and which ones we can reach in order to do more good better. The model for adaptive response to complex cyclical disasters is covered in more detail elsewhere in this conference. MARC-D, that's the best name we could come up with, is the model for adaptive response to complex cyclical disasters. It was built for the compounding reality the classic curve captures through one slice. MARC-D has 4 phases. 1. Anticipation, readiness, risk communication, preparation. 2. Impact, safety, psychological first aid, practical needs, and trusted information. 3. Adaptation, stabilization, community support skills. 4. Growth and recovery, restoration, reflection, and meaning making. The phases are cyclical and overlapping. Recovery doesn't end the story, it re-enters anticipation, better prepared, and at any given moment different groups may occupy different phases at once. One home is still rebuilding, while their neighbor is back in impact stage after an aftershock. A quick word on where this comes from. MARC-D grew out of spring of 2020 events. The overlapping COVID waves and the California wildfires developed with the GAP Committee on Disasters, Trauma, and Global Health I co-chair, Vibrant Emotional Health, and then Decision Point Systems. It's a behavioral health framework, and I'm using it here as the operating grid. You can find it at marcd.info. That single feature, overlap, is why a linear playbook fails us and why any tool we build has to serve several phases at once for several groups at once. Mark D has a few different components. We won't go into full detail, but we'll cover the high points. First, phases of disasters, survivors, community leaders, and responders, in the same phase, but with very different needs. This allows us to focus on key stakeholder groups, though there are more than 3, of course, including subgroups like family and children among survivors. Second, the community balance sheet. Resources versus vulnerabilities and gaps tracked over time, aggregate by design, the safeguard we built in earlier. Third, stress load threshold. Foundational stressors plus chronic plus acute, multiple disasters weighed against community capacity, a way to see when a community is approaching its limit. Fourth, healthy stress regulation through the idea of homeoresis, not a fixed set point, but a moving equilibrium, the adaptive zone between chaos on one side and paralysis on the other. Together, these 4 tools turn a good intention into something you can actually track, resource, and hand to the next team when your rotation ends. Continuity is itself a good outcome. Here's where AI use and misuse vary by disaster phase. Key for design, development, testing, and implementation, since functional outcomes shift with the phase, the context, and who's affected. Recall governed use, proper AI governance layers from an engineering perspective. In anticipation, governed use could be trusted preparedness content, offline packets, and readiness education. Misuse could be misinformation at scale. In impact, governed use could be orientation, needs navigation, and information fidelity. Misuse, autonomous triage, letting AI decide who gets what, while supporting needs assessments so humans decide, is a balanced use. In adaptation, governed use is continuity of support after responders leave, plus skills pathways for recovery. Misuse could be dependency and pseudotherapy. In growth and recovery, governed use, reflective resources, and after-action learning. Misuse could be premature closure algorithms that rush people through grief. The design lesson: every phase carries both opportunities and risks. With AI platforms proliferating ahead of safety and efficacy research, whether to adopt or test it demands real consideration. And because AI could meaningfully fill service gaps, it equally deserves that consideration and resources for well-managed development. DBH Specialist Copilot isn't a real app. It's an example illustrating the presentation's main points. This is a minimum viable product mock-up that could be built to run safe and stable, offering basic support and psychoeducation during crisis response. Like many platforms, it would start from one or a few well-defined workflows, with the right and wrong outputs specified up front. That matters because large language models never run raw. Unless you're a techie, you're not using what are called base models. Familiar foundation models are deeply wrapped inside deterministic software with a range of approaches for training and fine-tuning. On the left-hand side, governed use, grounded only in reviewed materials navigable by phase, stakeholder, and support intensity. Every item shows its source, evidence class, and review status, and it routes to qualified human help under well-specified conditions. Offline first for frontline and community health workers, with printable packets when connectivity fails, and supports responder self-care and buddy check-ins, privately by default. On the right, named misuse ruled out by design. No diagnosis, triage, or risk scoring, no surveillance, geolocation, or profiling, no open internet answers, the reviewed library only. Human agency and authority is preserved. Future versions could become smarter, with more autonomy if developed properly. Building governance discipline in from the start, not just best practices, evidence, and expertise, but technologists and subject matter experts working together, using research like pragmatic randomized controlled trials to ensure apps work across different groups and conditions, orients us toward better use of AI and less misuse. Early prototypes are good engineering practice. MVPs can go live quickly with good engineering support, but take time to properly test and develop. So seize opportunities while keeping a cautionary stance, especially given AI hype and the drive to commercialize. When it comes to AI, I have personally found these tools to be groundbreaking, and I spend a fair amount of time developing agentic systems based on ethical governance and pro-social alignment. Regardless of one's inherent interest in AI, it is important to stay up to date about developments in the field as they pertain to our own areas of interest. AI in and of itself is generally neither bad nor good as I see it. As with other tools, much depends on how we use them and for what purposes. But because AI is also very fast developing and potentially so powerful, disruptive in its own right, we need to approach AI differently from other technology, with more active consideration and a steeper learning curve. Thank you for taking your valuable time to listen to my presentation. I'm sorry I'm not there with you, and I hope the information I have presented will be useful for the important work you are doing.